Today, I'm going to try and delve a bit deeper into a certain area of nutrition. Sharon gave you a very good understanding of some of the considerations that you need to take into account when deciding how much energy you need day to day, and how the potential impacts that then has on training and performance quality. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to look into two particular areas of what we know as the pyramid of nutrition priorities. We're specifically going to delve into fuel and exercise, and then how you might eat around competition day to get the most out of your competition and your performances. We'll also touch on hydration and how you keep on top of it and monitor it, but also then some of the things you can do or the practices you can implement to make sure that you are hydrated day to day. So in terms of the pyramid of nutrition priorities, Sharon would have touched on that bottom tier of this really well last week in terms of the considerations you need to take into account when deciding how much energy you need. And it's really important that you get that base foundation in a solid place before you can start looking at the next tiers above that. Today, what we're going to look at is more specifically the macronutrients part of it and the specific macronutrient there, and the timing and the frequency that we might have those macronutrients to try and get the most out of, whether it's training or competition, that we're looking to get the most out of our performances. As you'll see there, supplementation is very much the cherry on top. It's the last thing that we look at, and it's definitely for latter stage in careers. So, you know, above the age of 18, 20, where all the foundation pieces of nutrition and the food is solid. So making sure energy balance is right, then going into all the macronutrients, micronutrients, timing and frequency. What today is really about is looking beyond what Sharon spoke to and that balanced nutrition routine that we build up, and making sure that there's enough energy coming in for what's being pumped out. And then today is looking at, okay, let's select the right type of food at the right time and make sure that that gets us the next kind of step in the right direction in terms of fueling our performances, whether it's a training or at competitions. So we're specifically going to look at carbohydrates, and there's two branches to the carbohydrates. So there's the high GI simple form of carbohydrates, which are digested and broken down at a much faster rate. So when we eat them, they are more readily available sooner after we eat them, and that means that for that pre-training or pre-competition type snack piece, these foods fit in perfectly. So 60 to 90 minutes beforehand, looking to include some of these foods here, or even during longer, more intense training sessions or the competition environment. These are the types of foods that we tend to promote inclusion of. So fruit, dried fruit, cereals, cereal bars, and then your sweeter type goods, so jellies and the like would fit in there. Isotonic drinks or fruit smoothies and fruit juices as well all form that kind of branch of carbohydrates. On the other side of the coin then are your lower GI ones. So they're more complex carbohydrates. They have a bit more fiber in them, so they get digested at a slower rate. And then as a result of that, the energy gets released much more gradually into the body, into the bloodstream. So these are the foods that we use as, I suppose, a longer term fuel up provision. So 2 to 4 hours before any training session or competition, these would be the foods that we tend to move towards, which are whole grain breads, rices, pastas, potatoes, and then oats and Weetabix if you were looking at like a breakfast type option. With these, they're also, I suppose, if we look at our day, they're the staples in most of our dinners or our lunches or our breakfasts, so those main meals in the day. And that makes sense because they are a slower absorbed food source, so they're a more gradual burner for us in terms of energy. when we pull it into a practical sense, and how do we make sure that we're getting enough of those foods in at the right times or on the days, day to day, depending on our training demand, you can use this plate model as a real simple guide to make sure that you are getting a decent amount, a sufficient amount for you. So you'll see here the protein is the exact same on both plates, and that's because your protein requirements are a constant thing. So they're a quarter plate of every plate that you have. Then you have the main change being your carbohydrate portion and your vegetable portion. So as the vegetable portion comes down, your carbohydrate portion goes up, or vice versa. If you have a more skills-based training session or just a one-off training session in the day, which is of a moderate type intensity, then you'll be looking at the plate on the left-hand side here, which gives you about a 35% of the plate being carbohydrates, which is roughly about 1 to 2 fists or tennis ball sized servings on the plate. Whereas if you take that harder training session where it might be like a double session day or a particularly intense or long training session, more than 2 hours, 2 hours in duration with several varying intensities, then you'll be looking at the right hand plate there, which is half the plate being carbohydrates, so 2 to 3 fists, and possibly even like a fruit juice or a fruit smoothie on the side. And that's also the plate that we use when it comes to trying to load or saturate the muscle tissue with carbohydrates, with glycogen, in order to support competition performance. So it will be the plate that we use in what's known as the carb load period. So in terms of preparing for competitions then, excuse me, these are some of the some of the timings that we would suggest, I suppose, in relation to competition. But these, as Sharon said, should be practiced in training. So these are times that we would try to feed, I suppose, in training day to day, so that you can get used to it and you have a set routine when it comes to competition, which then allows you to get the most from your competition day performances. So I've taken 3 start times for a competition here, just for example purposes. So 10 a.m. start time, 1 p.m. start time, and then 7 p.m. start time. But the principle here is that the pre-comp meal is in that 2 to 4 hour window before a event, and the snacks then are about 60 to 90 minutes beforehand, and the final little top up is in 30 minutes if you feel the need for it. But again, depending on things like nerves and your ability to handle that second snack, it's completely optional. So it's not a must, but it's just there as a potential. So with that pre-comp meal, what you're looking at is like a carb-rich meal. Ideal scenario is using that kind of half plate model as a real top up before you go to your competition. Again, that's the same when it comes to training. So either of those plates are larger carbohydrate plates, and they're your carb-rich meal. You then have the snack, which can take the form of like a fruit juice, fruit smoothie, yogurt with some granola, milkshake. I suppose what you're looking for with them is higher GI carbs, simpler carbohydrates, with a small amount of protein, just mixed in there from a satiety perspective. But the main focus is on the carbohydrate and trying to top up your stores and your provision of glucose in terms of being transported around in your blood to the working muscles when you're training or competing. And then that like pre-comp snack too, completely optional, will be in the half hour beforehand, and that comes down to the individual and whether you want that. But again, simpler forms, so it could be a couple of jellies or a couple of gulps of an isotonic drink or a piece of fruit just to tide you over and as a final little top up. for your performances. So as you can see there, there's, I suppose, a good array of options. So there's the morning session, there's the mid-afternoon type session, and then that evening session. And you can work on your own little schedule there in terms of building up your timing around competition day. If we look a bit further, I suppose, into the competition timeline, this is what we would, ideal scenario would be, where there's like particularly if there's many efforts of high intensity across the day, so several bouts or several rounds of a competition, and you're looking to get the most out of yourself right until the latter stages of the competition, there should be a period of carb top up, carb load protocol. So trying to saturate your muscle glycogen stores, which is your main energy source for the competition performance and fueling the intensity of the exercise. So that should take place from about 24 to 36 hours before competition start time through till that 4 hours beforehand. So that's mainly done by increasing your lower GI carb intake in all your main meals and popping in a few snacks across the day as well, where there's more carbohydrates in those snacks. And really what you're looking to try and achieve is just saturate muscle glycogen stores and liver glycogen stores so that you have a full fuel tank going into the competition. So that's between, I suppose, T minus 36 hours up until 4 hours before the event. And then you're looking at that kind of 1 to 2 hour window, so 60 to 90 minutes before the competition. You're looking at using some of those snacks that have been using pre-training to top up your fuel stores. So higher GI options, as I said, things like milkshakes can be good there. So banana, a glass of milk, and a bit of peanut butter in a smoothie blender, blitzed up to form a milkshake. It could be a simple fruit smoothie that you choose there, or it could be something like a yogurt pot with some granola and some fruit in it. You might also just go for something along the lines of a cereal bar or a piece of fruit there, which will be, all of those would be higher GI options, primarily carbohydrates. So it's a nice little top up of carbs before you compete. Within the competition day then, there's a couple of considerations. So what's the duration of break between your rounds or between your different events? If it's a shorter turnaround time, then you're certainly looking at simpler forms and possibly even liquid forms of carbohydrates. So things like isotonic drinks, fruit, jellies, cereal bars. But if you have a longer turnaround time, it could be something like a wrap or a sandwich that you have, or some soup, which is providing you with a bit more nutritional quality. So there'll be more carbohydrates there, possibly a bit of protein in there, and some veggies or color. So it's a slower source of energy if you have a longer break between your sessions. And then the main thing, I suppose, that you want to keep on top of is your hydration status. So you want to try and maintain a good hydrated state right from start to finish, so that you can maintain concentration and focus, and that there's no, I suppose, drop off in terms of performance. If you're a heavier or salty sweater, that's where the likes of those sports drinks, so the isotonic drinks, provide a perfect opportunity, I suppose, to rehydrate, but also to fuel. So they have electrolytes in them as well as the fluids, which help with your hydration status, but they also have high GI carbs, which are your main fuel source then come competition time. So it's really important that, I suppose, you pay attention to the turnaround time between events, but also then what type of a sweater you are. So are you a salty, heavy sweater, or are you quite a light sweater? And that will decide what form of snacks and food you use across the day. But certainly it comes down to planning and preparation. So most of us know that in a lot of competition venues, the provision of food is quite low or quite poor. So certainly bringing your own options from home, and lunchbox options is a fantastic way for you to cover your bases and make sure you have what you need on the day to get the most out of your performances. And then this is something that we'll talk a bit more about next week in next week's session. So that post-training and post-competition window and trying to get the most out of our recovery. I suppose the most important thing from the fueling perspective is that you cover off refueling with higher carbohydrate sources. And this is particularly important in multi-day events. So if you have 2 to 3 days of an event or a weekend of competition, then the refuel component to recovery is really important. And that could be a combination of liquid carbohydrate sources in the form of fruit smoothies or fruit juices. It could be the likes of your glass of milk or your pint of milk that you can buy in carton form, or it could be just a wrap or a roll that you have with you, which provides some carbohydrates there. And then you follow that up again, moving back towards those 2 plate models that we used, and including that kind of half plate of carbohydrates in there with some protein source and some color in the next kind of 30 minutes to 4 hour period after you finish up your competition. So that's the I suppose fueling for competition and the competition window. The other thing that we really need to be on top of is our hydration. So with hydration, you're trying to, I suppose, be as on top of it as you can and work ahead of yourself. So you're trying to drink ahead of time rather than getting to a point where you're dehydrated and performance starts to potentially drop off. So in terms of day to day, the ideal scenario is your urine color when you go to the toilet is sitting between 1 to 3 there on that scale. If you're 4 and above, you're looking to try and drink up more fluids to bring it down to that clear, pale urine color. And then that's kind of daily. If you wanted to be very specific about it, you could aim for at a baseline level about 35 milliliters to 40 milliliters for every kilogram of mass. But definitely, I suppose the go-to, because sweat rate and fluid losses are quite individual, the go-to should be just using your urine color as your main guide. In the 1 to 2 hours before you train or you compete, aiming for about a pint of fluid is a good little goal to try and head towards. So again, mix up the fluids. You could add some dilute in there and a pinch of salt just to help with some of the absorption of the retention of the fluid. And that's particularly important if you're training indoors or if you're training or competing in a warmer environment where you might be sweating that bit more. And then during the event, what you're looking to try and do is just drink to your thirst, or roughly aiming for about 2 to 3 mouthfuls of fluid every rest period, 10 to 15 minutes throughout a training session. Within training, I would say to go towards the water as your go-to rather than the carb type drinks, unless it's a particularly heavy training session and a prolonged training session. But otherwise, water and a pinch of salt or dilute is perfectly fine. In terms of competition, that's where you might use the likes of the isotonic drinks, and particularly if you are a heavier or salty sweater. So they'll obviously form that kind of fuel source and hydration all in one. So they can be a brilliant little addition when you get to the competition time. So that's it for today. What the recipe that we have up today is also a brilliant option for a kind of a pre-training snack, or during your tournaments or competitions, using it as a snack throughout the day. It has some good carbohydrates in there from oats and bananas. They can be changed to, instead of bananas, put in like a baked cooked sweet potato instead of the different fruits that are in there. So there's dried fruit in there. You can switch that up for dried raisins or sultanas or cranberries, but make it up to your own preference is what I would say. But it's a brilliant option to have there in your kit bag that you can bring in a lunchbox for pre-training snack or during competitions. I'll see you next week where we'll chat about recovery.